Hey guys, and welcome to today's video, and this is another battle report. Very exciting to bring you this, and this is my Necrons versus Orks in a 2000 point game. So without further ado, let's jump into the list. So this is the same Necron list that I fielded in my previous battle report, so it's featuring an Overlord, Catacomb Command Barge, 40 warriors split into 10 and 2 15s, 10 Immortals, 9 Scarabs, 6 Destroyers, 2 Barges and a Doom Scythe. So pretty much exactly the same as the list I fielded before. Getting quite familiar with how this is playing. Nice objective holders with their resurrection, not relying on cryptech abilities, just relying on their natural save and their natural reanimation, and then kicking out firepower with the barges and using the command barge and the overlord to buff where needed. So this is the shot of the army itself, so all fully painted, all looking rather cool. And this is the 2000 point Orc army, so it's a power level of 114, bang on 2000 points, featuring Zadsnark himself on the Ripper bike, also a big mech on bike, 2 blobs of 30 boys, one sort of shooty, one sort of choppery, 10 burner boys which actually go in a battle wagon, 10 Gretchen as a screen, 9 war bikers which are horrific. Then in the spearhead detachment features Zadsnark himself, a weird boy, 4 big guns with cannons, a Morkanaut and the battle wagon, alongside 10 looters, which is the holding down the firepower, trying to shut down lanes kind of stuff. So this is the list. So let's crack into the deployment. So here's the battlefield then. Fairly not too sparsely populated with terrain, but enough cover and enough bits and pieces to force some manoeuvres and some choke points. So a fairly even scattering, and we're playing the full length of the board, so the hammer and anvil deployment for this mission. So I'm going to be deploying the Necrons on the right of your screen and the Orcs on the left, and here we go. That is the deployment situation. So you can see at the top of the screen there are the cannons, and this is the kind of plan. So with the weird boy, he's going to be casting the jump to push those big blobs of boys behind my lines. In the meantime, the bikers and the characters are going to scream forward with their really fast manoeuvres down the bottom side of the screen there, whilst the Morkanaut sort of strolls forward, nonchalantly trying to absorb firepower and hit into my lines. The Gretchen are kind of a screen for the looters that are occupying that black building on the centre left of the screen. Now for my plan, I'm going to have to let them come to me really. I've got very short range guns, maximum 24 inches across the board, fully aware of the speed and the jump ability. So I'm sitting there watching the top right hand corner of the screen, which is sort of the open area for the jump, and then sort of looking for these war bikers screaming forward, and then trying to counter those mainly with destroyers because they're the multi-wound killers with decent strength against bikes, and then using warriors as and when, and hoping to use the scarabs against the Morkanaut itself. So let's get straight into turn 1. As expected, the Orcs pile straight forward with those bikes moving pretty fast, and they've got a 14-inch odd move, plus they can advance, which we do in a second here. We didn't actually roll it at the same time, but made no odds physically in the game that we were playing. So yep, all the characters, the big mech on bike, Zadsnark on his Ripper bike, then the Morkanaut's piling down the middle as expected. Just he kicks out an awful lot of shots, those things. The Morkanaut and Gorkanaut are pretty powerful, and they carry a stack of wounds with a good save, especially with a custom force field thrown in. As I said, we did forget to do the advance, so we're just cracking into that now, so they just get that extra 3 or 4 inches I think they moved there. And obviously advancing the characters, rolling those separately as they're not part of a unit. Then we're on to a psychic phase. So the psychic phase, as expected, is the jump. So the big blob of shoot boys on the centre left of the board. I think it's a 6 or a 7 to cast, but for every 10 boys within range of the weird boy, it's a +1 on your cast. So it's when you've got those big blobs of boys all hanging around and the looters, it's almost an auto cast. So in he comes, Ian from White Shark Gaming, just piling, just checking out where that 9 inches away from my rear lines is going to be, and we're going to mark it out with some dice because with a big blob of 30 orcs, it's easy to get, just slightly out there. So we put in a little line of dice just to measure it out. and then he can move his 30 boys straight across into those back lines. So with the psychic phase pretty much wrapped up, just placing those final models, we're going to move into the shooting phase. And this is going to feature all those twin shooters that come on the bikes now. So they're an assault 6 weapon, so that's an awful lot of guns coming out there. So he's just lining up my warriors, which are actually in that little tree line in front of my annihilation bars. There's a little unit of 15, I think, in that little unit there. So he's firing awful lots of dice. Okay, they need 5s, but surprisingly Ian likes to roll a lot of 5s against me, which is all part of the deal. So he's firing into those warriors, and then we've also got the big cannon line, which is going to attempt to take on that northern side warrior blob and scarabs blob. And then there'll be some looter shots as well, taking in advantage of that long range. As you can see, knocking down plenty of warriors that are in that tree line. They're on a +1 cover save, which is quite handy, but volume of shots does see a few fall down. Just a quick check on Battle Scribe there, which is always convenient. If you haven't got Battle Scribe, I highly recommend it. It's a great app for list building. The guys who run that keep it really up to date. They're pretty hot on making sure that points and abilities are all in there. There we go. They've got the cannon firing off of the big truck there, and then we've got Morkanaut opening up as well. Now he does pack an awful lot of guns. They are, poor ballistic skill, but he's picking on my barges at the moment with the heavier weapons here, with lots of missiles and shenanigans going on. And the lots of shooter weapons that are all over it, picking into the warriors and knocking a couple more over. Moving to the other side of the map, we're going to be looking at the cannons. Now the cannons fire random strength and random number of shots, so you have to roll off those, and that covers the whole unit, so they get lots of shots and some interesting strength rolls. But surprisingly, I think in this particular case, not so many wounds, so I was quite fearful of those cannons, but actually they weren't the greatest unit on the Orc side this time. Also the looters, they roll a random number of shots each time as well. But yeah, not overly effective. But here come the sluggers from the rear lines now. They're all piling in loads of shots there. You can see by the sheer volume of dice that we're rolling here, that's definitely a big blob of 30. Having to roll several piles of dice at the same time. More fearful though of when they get into combat, and as we can see, taking a whole bunch of guys that are getting knocked over. That's my immortal unit that's just getting wrecked right there. I think that's taken down at least 5 or even 6 there. Fortunately for me, Necrons are a leadership 10, which means that they don't even start taking casualties really until you've lost 6, and even then it's pretty hard to make them the soulless robots run away and take extra casualties. Then the charges were declared, and you can see some Overwatch fire going in, which is why a couple of the Orcs are being removed there. We can see some wounds now being inflicted on the command barge as well. Must have missed a minor point of shooting at that point there. But this was still our second game. There's a couple of little orders and a little bit gone awry at some point. We take a couple of models back and we put them forward again. It's a friendly game. We're still learning the rules. We're a bit more au fait these days though. Now we've had a few more games under our belt. But yeah, you have to forgive us if we've made some obvious mistakes, but it's all part of the learning process. So we move straight into the Necrons phase then. So I'm aiming the Scarab straight at the Morkanaut. They've got a good 10-inch range, and they can inflict wounds on any toughness on a 5+, so pretty good for taking out high toughness stuff. 4 attacks each per base, so that's quite tasty. Trying to potentially remove a few wounds first. I mean, they will get stomped on eventually, but they do cause a little bit of trouble for these guys. In the meantime, everything else has turned round to focus fire on that big blob of 30. It has been whittled down a little bit. He did fail his charge, note. That's why they're still exactly where they were. And now we're just lining up the big mob of Ork bikes, or the war bikes that are about to punch into my face. So we need to make sure they're whittled down as best possible. In the meantime, then the Doomscythe has moved up that flank. You can just about make that out on the bottom of the screen. Unfortunately, my camera height is restricted by ceiling. So the ceiling to the above the table we play on is not the highest in the world, and the camera can't quite cover the entire battlefield. But you sort of miss out on about 2 or 3 inches around each side of the board. So I'm sure you can see most of the battlefield. All the exciting stuff happens in the middle anyway. So the command barge always casts, for me, his ability on the big destroyer blob. That gives them a re-roll of their, well, +1 to hit, sorry. They're already re-rolling ones as part of the destroyer rule, and those are kicking in all their shots into that big blob of Ork bikes. Destroyers, if you don't know, they have a strength 5 gun. It is 2 shots, AP -2, AP -3 even, sorry, and D3 wounds per bit of damage, so they're brilliant for taking out bikes and terminators and so on. Pretty much my only anti-armour really in this particular army of Necrons. I don't have any bigger guns really than that at the moment. Also firing in then is the Annihilation barges. They're kicking out an awful lot of Tesla shots, and as you can see, eventually these bikes are getting heavily whittled down. So that concluded the Necron shooting phase, and we're now switching back to the Orks for turn 2. This is where they're now closing those lines, are going to be in charge range, so the Scorcher boys in their truck now get rather close, and with the sights firmly set on the Doomscythe, because burners auto-hit flyers. And the remaining characters and final knob are going to try and sweep round and attack into my barges and command barge and destroyers. While that's all going on the north side of the battlefield, the remaining Ork boys all sort of head towards the Immortals and the remaining warrior blob. So, into the psychic phase, and surprise surprise, the weird boy has cast his de-jump rule, and that's moved another 30 blob of boys right into my back lines once again. And with firm eyes set on the central right building there that is full of Necron warriors, all pointing their guns towards the Morkanaut, and now have another threat to that rear flank. With the psychic phase over, it's time for the Orks to open up with their guns. So we're talking all those bikes with their 2 big shooters firing 6 shots apiece into the warriors that are in the woods. We can see those targeting theirs down there now, rolling lots of dice, making a few good saves here at this point, so that's not too bad. I think only a couple actually go down, but I'd already covered a couple from the start of my turn with reanimation protocols. The looters are now eyeing up theirs, and once again rolling poorly for their random number of shots. They normally get D3 shots, but every time, fortunately for me, he was only rolling 1, so they're only getting 10 shots rather than potentially 30. As you can see, they did pretty little, so it was over to the cannons to open up now, and they're picking on my warriors that are in front of that north, or that top right hand corner. You see casualties being taken at a rapid pace. Morkanaut opening up, and now we're talking the remaining shots and all those boys, and we're just sort of pointing out what's in range and what's not in range, and then rolling those mega buckets of dice as all my warriors tumble to the floor. Sort of left just a couple of Immortals still standing. They're still standing, and the Scarabs are still going as well. And then we're going to move on to that mega blob that's just arrived, and we're just finishing off those shooter boys, sorry. Piles and piles of dice, as they're all in rapid fire range. Lots of dice, lots of shooting going on. Orks surprisingly pull out the hits when they need to, and there we go, there goes the remaining warrior blob pretty quick. Then we can move on to looking where these boys are going to shoot at. So they're actually, I think they were looking at whether they could all be in rapid fire range of the destroyers, but actually electing to shoot into the warriors that are in cover. Morkanort giving some supporting fire, and then he's gone into the scarabs there. Overwatch does very little. That was my bucket of dice on the Overwatch in red. Here we go, and we get some shots. Not a lot going on there by the looks of it. And then we're just looking at the charge ranges. So rolling 2d6 and getting those bikes into combat. They're pretty scarily quick, those things, especially with the re-roll for the here we go rule. So remaining charges then, so that blob of orcs piles into my immortals. The other squad of orcs though fortunately failed their charge for me, so that meant I got some Overwatch shots, but no combat ensued in that particular phase. So we then move into the combats for the chargers. So first off is the Stomper. He gets a whole bucket of attacks. I think he's getting 3 attacks for a stomp times by the number of base attacks. So that takes out a whole bunch of kinetic scarabs. Then the pilings come in from the remaining orcs into those immortals. Now these are going to get buckets of attacks with choppers and everything else. They get lots of attacks. I think they get 2 base, 1 for the chopper, and then if they've got a certain mob size they get an extra attack. As we can see, immortals start to crumble. Picking out more hit dice here as we go into further combat. And surprisingly, more immortals start to tumble from more of those attacks. Not a pretty sight. You know, Necrons in combat, unless they're leash guard with their war scythes, yeah, gonna kind of struggle. You're kind of relying on the Gaunt's weapons to do the business with Necrons on the most part. So over here then, the war boss Zagstruck has got into combat with my command barge. Managed to sneak around the side and actually was the nearest unit, so we got to shoot and charge into him. Yep, he's pretty powerful. He takes quite a few wounds off of the Annihilation Barge. He's packing a war scythe, so he actually did some damage back. I think he stripped a couple of wounds off of Ian's war boss there. My Necron Immortals, I think, survived down to 2 there, so hoping for some reanimation to get those back into the fight on the next turn. Having withstood quite a little bit of attacks against the Doom Scythe there, the Necrons move into their turn too, so flanking that round, doing a 90-degree turn and sending that towards the backfield there. In the meantime, just repositioning the Destroyers and Command Barge and the Annihilation Barges to try and maximise some efforts in this back corner, where I seem to be a little bit penned in my little castle that I've got going in that bottom right hand corner. So the Immortals get some reanimation, so there's a few guys come back there. My Command Barge regenerates a wound thanks to the living metal. And then the Immortals fall back. So it's time for a little bit of risk now, because we were pushing our time limit a little bit. Even though we're on turn 2, it had taken a little bit of time. I had to set up the camera, and that took unfortunately a little bit of time, and I was late in from work. But so a little bit of effort here to try and look for trying to take some objectives. So here we've moved the Destroyers forwards, trying to get some shots in, and the Command Barge to make sure his area of effect is good. And the Annihilation Barges move backwards there to try and put in their bucket of Tesla shots into that big blob of Orcs that are in that back line there. Now, Tesla Annihilation Barges, they're firing 8 shots, plus their underslung Tesla for 3 shots at strength 7. Any 6s to hit generate 2 extra hits. So potential bucket of dice coming towards those Orcs, and at strength 7 and strength 6 they're wounding on 3, so a good chance to wreck a few over there. It's time to gather some appropriate numbers of dice now going on. So just sort of working out how many annihilation bar shots we're going to be getting. The command barge is actually having a little pot shot at those remaining orcs that are just were engaged with the immortals, and that's, you know, just having a little pop there. In the meantime, then the annihilation barge is going to let rip into this big horde of orcs. This is my chance to finally roll a bucket of dice. This is my one few amount of time. So each annihilation barge, as I said, they've got the 8 Tesla and then a 3 underslung. So lots of wounds being rolled here, and we see just how many casualties we're going to start taking. As the second barge unleashes as well. And there we go, swaths of orcs are removed. That's almost half the unit, or at least a good third, maybe a little bit towards half the unit, annihilated by the annihilation barge, as their name dictates. So the destroyers are opening up as well, trying to inflict some damage. And there we go, we can start attacking that orc knob on his bike. So I actually split fire here, so I used some of the destroyers to shoot at him and some of the destroyers to shoot elsewhere. I'm just trying to remember where we actually fired those into. Now, it's been a couple of weeks since this game, and I'm recording the commentary a couple of weeks late, so I should really take notes, to be honest, rather than relying on video evidence alone. But he's down to 1 wound, so interesting shenanigans. I think I'm going to charge with the destroyers into the bike. I mean, they're only strength 4 when they charge, but they do have 2 attacks each, so good potential to do some damage. So here we go. Let's charge the destroyers in and see if they can do anything in combat. So they make it into combat. They didn't suffer anything from Overwatch, which was quite fortunate. That was what the dice were from the bike a little bit before. Let's get some combats going. Who'd have thought, eh? Necrons charging into combat without their dedicated combat troops. So just the pile-in moves going on, making sure that as many of them can get to fight as possible. And there we go, here come the the destroyer attacks. So at the end of that little bit of combat, I did manage to kill the knob, and then it was stomping at Stompface himself, killing off and wounding heavily some more scarabs. That kind of wrapped up the end of the Necron turn 2. A couple of leadership checks, no problems at all, no extra casualties, and we move into the Orc turn 3. Now, being big and stompy, he's quite able to fall back out of combat and then go and find something else to charge into. In the meantime, that big pile of remaining orcs who were immune to psychology at that particular phase because they've got too many guys in there. They're like leadership 20 or something still at this point, so they're never going to fail at that stage thanks to sort of a mob kind of rule. So they're moving into the big blob of warriors that I've still got occupying that building. So before the vehicle gets to move, the burner boys get to pile out. So we're just going to move the warlord around there a little bit so that he can get into some more combat action, trying to aim for my warlord, which is a little bit tricky to get round. But in the meantime, the burner's going to get out and unleash torrents of burning orc promethium into my destroyers. Now they'll be auto hitting as they do. They are a slightly lower version to a standard flamer. They are only flying D3 hits rather than D6, so they're not quite as powerful. But then you do take them in big mobs of 10 rather than sort of the odd flamer, so it kind of makes legitimate sense. The truck was only down to a 6-inch move though, because the Doomscythe had wrecked at least half the wounds off of it, so it was a little bit struggling for its manoeuvrability. But it's still got its weapons to fire. It's just down on performance. So a little bit of orc shooting going on. There goes one destroyer is down from some flamey action. In the meantime, the Gorkanaut is also letting rip with lots of guns. Fortunately for me though, I mean he's picking on some barges and so on, chinking off the odd couple of wounds, but Ballistic Skill 5 with the rockets and stuff were all missing, which was quite fortunate for me. He was more of a menace in combat, but it's just one of those things. Sometimes orcs are just super good at hitting, and then sometimes it's like, just when you need that rocket, please, please, please hit and try and get some big wounds, and it just doesn't work. But yep, started taking some more wounds on the destroyers. They're down to 4, so 2 have fallen. Lots of split fire from the Morkanaut, so there's lots of little amounts of dice being rolled as he's picking sort of big weapons on the barges and the smaller weapons on the destroyers. There's still a sort of blob of warriors that are in the middle, kind of screening my command barge. So I think we do have a little change of heart. I think we actually reset a little bit of this turn. Just the way we're just standing up my command barge. It does keep falling over. They're quite poorly balanced. But he was really aiming to try and charge. When we stood up the barge, it kind of meant that he couldn't get his base in there to try and charge him. So being the friends that we are, we kind of reset a little bit of this turn, as you'll see coming up. And he elects to turn the Morkanaut round and do something that he was more likely to have achieved, because the whole point of charging the barge was the plan. But we just sort of, because it had fallen over, it looked like we could get to it, but when we stood it up, the tip of the barge was behind the destroyers, and the size of the base kind of prevented it. So being friendly gamers and not super powerful win at all cost type of people, this is the kind of game that we have. In a friendly environment, we're not going to sit there and do silly things like that you might find at a super tournament, as it were. So all the orcs there are firing into my warriors, trying to thin their ranks as I start removing warriors, well, just knocking them down, as it were, making sure we keep a tally of how many die in this particular turn. Then we're going for a little bit of Overwatch, and I managed to kill a couple from Overwatch there. I noticed some of the rerolls, or not rerolls as such, but yeah, just sort of making sure I was rolling enough dice, because they're rapid fire range. I didn't have quite enough dice. That's why there was two handfuls of dice, sort of rolling around about 28 shots. Managed to kill a couple, but he makes his charge. Just looking at what else we can get in here. So this is where we're having this conversation, as I said, about what we can get in and what we can't get in, and we sort of make a decision around about here. So we do some more Overwatch kind of stuff, and I think Zagstrok's going to charge into the warrior blob that's kind of screening the back end of the annihilation of the Catacomb command barge, and he's got his big mech on bike in there as well. And this is where we're just sort of having a good look to see what can get in. And as you say, it kind of gets in there, but he can't get within. We can't move within an inch of my models. So this is where we're sort of being really careful and just sort of making sure that we try and learn the rules and play it as best as we possibly can. And because that wasn't possible, but it looked possible because of the way the barge was knocked over, we elected to sort of reset it and go, right, okay, well, all the shots will still have counted because they're in range, but we'll just move the Morkanaut back towards the other direction so that it can do something that he wanted it to do, and rely on his characters to deal the damage over in that bottom right hand corner. One of the good things about playing good friends at home is you're not sitting there trying to be on the competitive edge and trying to take stupid advantages over as much as possible. It's all about having a good game with a good bit of banter, with two good painted armies as well, making sure, I'm not the biggest fan of using unpainted models. I do use it occasionally. I have played a game this week with my new demons, and which is not going to be shown as a battle report because it's not fully painted, just testing out the theory. But anything that I'm going to put on the channel as a battle report is going to be painted, as that is the nature. You're playing. I've always been a fan of you play with your opponent, not against your opponent. It's something that I think a lot of people do miss out on for part of the enjoyment. You want to beat them on skill, and you want to beat them on some luck of the dice. You don't want to beat them on technicalities. It's a far better way of enjoying the game. So lots and lots of attacks coming in from the Orcs now into combat. This is where they excel. These are the Slugger and Chopper guys. I think have about 4 attacks each on the charge. They're pretty disgusting. Lots of piles of dice, lots of wounds going off. I'm going to be knocking a few warriors over from this phase, I can tell you. Fortunately, they don't all die, and I do manage to get my Warlord with his war scythe in there, getting to kill a couple of orcs back. I do manage to roll some dice to try and kill some of the orcs. But as you can see, big piles of warriors are now falling down as the resultant failed saves. Yeah, that's quite a few dead. Look at that big pile, just all mounting up, just volumes of attacks from the orcs there. That's doing what they do best, right? So at least they've got a bit of manoeuvrability with the jump roll, and they have to withstand at least one round of full shooting and then some overwatch, and then they get to do their damage. But that's why you take the big hordes. If you're running a horde army, you have to withstand some of that. In the meantime, those HQs have piled in. Oh, not the camera there. Those HQs have piled into that little blob of warriors. That was all they could manage to get in, but they do wreck those pretty easily, as you'd expect with Mega Chopper, Huge Choppers, and Power Claws and so on. So we move into the Necrons turn 3 then, and we get some reanimation thanks to all these knocked down dudes. We start counting and we start bringing some back. I think I get about 6 or 7 back here. Fortunately, there's like one guy that remained in that middle blob there, and just about managed to get some of these back in without going within. And they need to be within an inch of the guy that was already remaining there, and not an inch of an enemy model. So you have to be pretty careful, because if you roll a too big a number, a lot of those aren't coming back this particular turn. Also managed to get back one of my destroyers. Now destroyers come back, or any model that's multi-wound that has this kind of ability. So destroyers are a great example of this. Destroyers reanimate with their full wounds. They don't come back on 1, they come back on 3 full wounds, which is quite tasty. So we're quite aware that this is going to be the last turn of the game. So we were running a bit late, and it had been quite bloody for 3 turns already. So it's a case of now trying to look at what objectives we had. So we were playing for the command objective cards, and it's a case of now, right, so what can we do to look at those cards? Now what I want to do in future battle reports is actually show you what these cards are and try and annotate what's going on there, so you can keep abreast of the scoreline as we play as well. The Doom Scythe just moving across there, making sure that he stays on the board and flying in little squares or diamond patterns as they have to do. Making sure I'm securing that objective with my remaining immortals that had regenerated a few there. And then right, I've got to now sort of realistically, just for the giggles, I want to make sure I put some wounds into that Morkanite. I think he'd taken quite a few at this point. So sort of move in destroyers, because destroyers are going to be pretty good at doing it. 5 to wound and D3 wounds per wound. But just sort of looking at the objectives, right, what I really could do with that centre objective. So still thinking about my movement. I don't actually want to put the Doom. I can't remember why I changed my mind on the Doom Scythe. I think I was still thinking of line of sights or something like that, and I thought, you know what, I can still fire Teslas out of its ass. Hasn't got to be pointing directly at the models it needs to be shooting at. So let me just change the position slightly. Then I decided destroyers should go towards that centre to try and claim that centre objective. As it was the last turn, I wasn't going to be encountering anything back, so it was a case of, right, let's try and maximise the objective points. So skipping right through the psychic phase, as Necrons are soulless and don't do that, we move straight into the shooting and see if we can do any damage whatsoever. See if we can get some more points. So pretty much everything fired into the Morkanite, just to see, is it possible that we could blow it up, and if it does blow up, could it cause some mortal wounds nearby? And I think at the resultant end of it, I think we managed to get it down to just 2 wounds. I think we start knocking wounds off as we rotate the dice round on the wound counter. I think we end up leaving the big boy just down to 2. Couldn't finally strip the last ones off of it. So and that kind of wrapped up where the game was. And that was pretty much the end of the game. I think we had a few just cheeky shots, any sort of remaining weapons that were really clutching at straws to try and take those last couple of wounds off, but yeah, managed to sort of ping the odd wound here and there, but it was down to 2 by the end of it. I think the Annihilation Barges having a little pop as well. I think they were just about in range and just about in line of sight, and maybe they weren't quite in range then. So, and that was it. Called it there. So we finished at turn 3 And the final score was a hefty 8 points to Ian's Orks and 8 points to my Necrons. So the game was officially a tie. And we think on reflection that was actually pretty good result for the game. We missed a couple of bits once again, as this was our second game. So there's a couple of little lessons learned. For me, Orks are nastier than ever. The jump ability is awesome, and the bike speed is just phenomenal. And never underestimate ballistic skill of 5+ on an Ork. I had a couple of confusions over airborne and flying not being the same thing, but it didn't actually have an impact on the result. And once again, thanks to Ian, White Shark Gaming Studios, for a cracking game. We have had another game. I'll be editing that battle report. That's going to feature a different style of Ork army and my first outing with some Imperium models. So my Imperial Fists, with a little bit of support from an Imperial Navy flyer, are going to make the channel very soon. So I hope you enjoyed that battle report. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I shall catch you on the next video.